I thought before we got to the specifics of the policy debates, it would be important to sort of look back at the election and what it told us about our political landscape. Obviously, things are very volatile and very toxic right now. We're very polarized. But what I saw in the last election, and what I think both parties in private will acknowledge, is that they're both in a very precarious position. The coalitions of the two parties are very fluid and changing in very interesting ways. Democrats have a broader coalition with more disparate groups within it and disparate ideologies and priorities, but they have started to pick up under President Trump's era, former Republicans. What's interesting also is that the Republican coalition, which is a more narrow and unified coalition, is picking up working class non-white voters, as we saw in the last election. And also there is more interest among their base in a government safety net, which is in contrast with what Republicans since Reagan have been fighting to limit. So these changes, in my view, although we're really still split down the middle, President Biden won this election, by fewer votes than Hillary Clinton lost the election to Donald Trump in 2016. I think what it tells us is that in their distaste and disgust about our political landscape and our politics, I think that voters are opening their minds, and I see that as a good thing. So I look forward to the discussion, and thank you again for having me.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman David AB. It has been an intense year. That's for sure. I knew 2020 was going to be intense. I didn't think it'd be this intense, and it's been a year since basically we've been working remotely, as many are still, unfortunately. Politics has been very polarizing. It was polarized, before President Trump came along, and now it's really become supercharged, and it's obviously become violent. The riot at the Capitol Hill was extremely unsettling. We had a handful of reporters up there, and just to see what happened in the place that I've been up there for 25 years was extremely unsettling. And as AB noted, the election was close. It was closer than I anticipated. I didn't think it would be a blowout, but I thought that it wouldn't go on for days before we knew that Biden had won. And I'm going to put in a plug for one of our reporters, Amy Parn. She wrote a book called Lucky, and it's about Joe Biden getting lucky. And obviously in his life, he hasn't been lucky in family situations, but he was fortunate for a number of things of why he ended up winning. Trump's tweets, Trump's first disastrous debate performance, as well as not handling the COVID-19 pandemic. If he had handled it just a bit better, he would have gotten a second term. And I didn't think that going into election night, but certainly the closeness of the race is certainly made me rethink that. So, and of course he could run again, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in 2024. As far as just brief thoughts on the Congress now, I agree with AB that both parties have their own issues right now, and the Senate is 50-50. The House is basically 50-50. Democrats were united in the beginning of this year behind COVID-19. Honestly, that was the easy part. Now comes the tough part of passing what could be a $2 to $4 trillion tax and spend kind of agenda that would raise corporations raise taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals. That's going to be very risky, and it's going to be very difficult to pass. So I'm fascinated to see how Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, the leader in the Senate, are able to unify their Democrats, because this is going to be not quite mission impossible to pass another huge bill, but it's going to be very difficult because both parties have their wings. The Republicans have the right wing, and the Democrats have the left wing, and that has showed up so far, but not really. In the last 24 hours, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has criticized the president's transportation spending, saying it's not enough. So we're going to see more of that over the next several months. So I think from a policy perspective, the next several months are going to be extremely, extremely fascinating. And again, thanks for asking me to do this morning.
Well, great. Well, why don't I start off with a few questions, as we have questions coming in. But, Congress, first did pass the COVID bill, and they did it totally, on a partisan basis. And they did it through a process that's called reconciliation, which, it's a technical thing, but what it allows is a mere majority. So they did not have to pick up any Republicans on the House or the Senate. And they also were able to keep their troops in line on the Democrat side. Now today, there's a big infrastructure package being announced. And again, there's talk of trying to do this large bill through reconciliation. Among other things, it includes a large corporate tax increase going from 21 back up to 28, which puts us higher than a lot of European countries, and then also changes a lot of labor laws. So how do you think, given that partisanship, how will they be able to hold all of the Democrats together, given some of the complaints from the Democrat caucus that the left wing is controlling them too much, and the moderates obviously are the ones who are going to have the big races and be the targets? How much are they going to be able to vote for major, historic, getting rid of right to work things, tax increases? How is that going to work for sort of a business-friendly Democrat in, say, a more moderate place?
Maybe you want to go first on that?
Yeah, I think that the Biden administration has been paying really effective attention to progressives, massaging their egos and assuaging their concerns behind closed doors with great effect. Just as Bob said, we knew that the COVID relief package was going to get Joe Manchin's vote in the Senate, that we were going to see the Democrats hang together. It was the first initiative. It was in response to these two coexisting emergencies. It was definitive, and they had to come along. Now, what we look at with this infrastructure package being so massive and broken into two parts is probably, if it succeeds, the result of a lot of very, very shrewd horse trading, where you will see the administration give moderates what they want. Many of them are demanding that the state and local tax deduction caps be removed. A lot of the pay-fors, a lot of the tax increases will be in play as a means to bring people along. And as they break this massive package into two parts, they will say, you'll get yours later. I'll deal with your gun control priorities when we get through this in August or September. That'll be first on the plate in the fall. Or I'll get to your priorities in the second tranche of this infrastructure package when we deal with social welfare programs and we talk about healthcare, education, and childcare. I'll deal with your climate initiatives in the first part of this infrastructure. And so it is, again, a very broad and diverse and divided coalition, and it is going to be a high wire act. I'm not betting on success. I'm saying that if we were to see them succeed, it would be likely a result of this kind of horse trading. And you heard President Biden be quite open about that at his press conference last week. He said, it's all about the ordering of things. It's all about the timing. And he has more experience watching the rhythms of legislative battles than a lot of previous presidents have. And he is in a sort of go for broke mode, if you will. He's likely to serve one term, and he wants to, as he said, he thinks he was hired to solve problems. He's not afraid of government debt. They're rethinking the economy in terms of inflation. That they're positing those concerns are overblown. So we know what his goal is. It's how he gets there, and I think that's going to be he will either succeed with Pelosi and Schumer in handing out goodies to the right people at the right time to keep them in line, or this will come apart for Democrats as they all put their own priorities for 2022 and 2024 ahead of kind of the mission and the goal of the party. He insists all the time, together we can accomplish this, but we must stay together. We must stay unified. And he does this message with them in private and in public. And that so far has been effective, I think, like I said, because of these private relationships that he's building. Bernie Sanders gets all the attention he wants. You haven't heard him say one thing negative about the administration, except that he wanted a $15 increase in the minimum wage, but somehow they've kept him quiet. And so what we're watching between now and September, which is not only the goal for the infrastructure legislation to pass, but then another fiscal cliff with the debt ceiling and the annual spending bill and lots of drama. The goal is to keep as many Democrats happy at a time. And again, I don't know if he'll succeed, but so far it's been better than I expected.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is going to be. I am skeptical of total success here for Democrats, just because it is very difficult to keep Democrats together at this time. As AB mentioned, Bernie Sanders has been a pretty good soldier. He wanted to join the Biden administration. Biden basically said no, and that was kind of a public snub. But Bernie is the budget committee chairman, and in the inside baseball world, in order to pass legislation that doesn't need Republican votes, you have to pass a budget. So Bernie Sanders is going to be he's got the steering wheel. And so he's going to put in a lot of his priorities into that budget resolution that first has to pass. No Republicans ever vote for a Democratic budget resolution and vice versa. And getting it out of the House, where a lot of the House centrists are in tough shape, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. I think there's a chance that Democrats may not be able to do the tax part of this. It's possible.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, how polarized the parties are. And obviously you have, on the right, you have the Freedom Caucus and people pulling them, to kind of stay in the Trump lane. Although you did have, with sort of the assault on Liz Cheney, with 2/3 of the caucus supporting her, perhaps that's a silent majority of the sane among Republicans. But then on the left, as you mentioned, AOC is pulling people to the left. But I think most of the election understanding shows that Biden really won and got that narrow win because people thought of him as a centrist. The House actually picked up Republicans picked up seats because Democrats were thought of as too extreme in the House. So how does Biden, how do we keep in that center lane? And is there some hope of centrism? Collins survived. We have some, some members who are still left there. But given Biden won on that basis, can he kind of bring that coalition, or are they going to stay in this? No, we'll just do it on our own. And then what does that mean electorally, 2 years from now?
It's a great question. I think it's going to be, I do think, as Chuck Schumer said, and AB indicated earlier, failure was not an option on the COVID bill. They had to get that passed. And they did. And it was a win. It was a big win, especially because it was in the first 50 days of Biden's administration. But now you're not just dealing with COVID relief, which you'd think would, unite the parties. I don't see any kumbaya happening. Biden ran on a bipartisan theme, and he could unify Republicans. And some people were saying, well, remember Mitch McConnell in the Senate and Joe Biden have a good relationship. I always thought that was overrated. They do have a good relationship. They did strike deals. They really were deals that had to be done, like debt ceiling and fiscal bills. This is Mitch McConnell doesn't have a lot of motivation, I think, to help the president. Certainly going into the midterms when Republicans could win back the Senate doesn't look great for them, but it's certainly possible. And the amazing thing is, as far as the bipartisanship is, as far as we know, Joe Biden, since he won, has not talked to Kevin McCarthy, who is the House Republican leader. Now, Joe Biden might not have been happy that McCarthy sided with most Republicans in trying to overturn election results, but Kevin McCarthy could be speaker. So I think they're going to continue to go the partisan route. That's, I think, I put my money on that.
Okay. Now maybe, Patrick, if you, I'm sorry I had to do this on my phone. You have some questions from the audience that you'd like to bring in so we include our audience?
Yes, hi there. We do have one question for our panelists, if they can perhaps touch upon how migration and immigration will be affecting the Democratic Party moving forward.
Or who's taking the question?
Why don't you go
both
on?
taking the question?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think that the immigration crisis that we're experiencing now at the border is really self-created. I mean, I think the Biden administration came in and knew, absolutely that not only is there a seasonal surge annually, but that the shift from Trump to Biden would be, helpful to traffickers and smugglers and people who were in the business of getting migrants over here in as large numbers as possible. And so they didn't plan. We don't have capacity. People aren't getting tested for COVID. It really, at any definition, is a debacle. They shouldn't be taking lectures about humane treatment of migrants from the world of President Trump and his allies, but it is not a tenable situation, and that's very clear. And so it becomes this issue that not only distracts from his rollout of the COVID relief program, but divides the party. You see, centrist Democrats saying, look, swing voters, they think this country's broke and we're still sick in a pandemic and this is chaotic. And why didn't you plan for this? And you were a vice president for 8 years. How is this so out of control? And people are jammed into these rooms and they're spreading disease, and it's nuts. And then you have people like Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the left wing of the Democratic Party saying, you need to take more of them. We need to spend more money on capacity. We need to not leave any in Mexico for waiting periods. And they want, they obviously want the opposite. So this comes at a tough time. I think it could have been prevented politically. It's sort of their first big mistake, right? Divide the party, create a diversion away from COVID relief and the success of the vaccine program, and have to keep answering all these questions as more, really dispiriting, depressing pictures come out in the media. It gives Republicans an issue. It divides the party. I think it's a mess. So it also it puts a big foot on the ability to get either a partisan immigration bill through or a bipartisan immigration bill through. There is actually bipartisan work going on immigration. It would not be a bill that progressive left wing of the Democratic Party likes, but it certainly has. There's a blueprint for it with guest worker programs, some border security, some legalization for dreamers. But again, creating this chaos at the border, I think, really infringed upon the paths of bipartisan success or even a partisan bill. And it inflames, obviously, the people who are the most active, the activists at the grassroots level of the base. And those are those progressives who believe that Biden won the election with 7 million votes and not fewer than 45,000 in the Electoral College, and that he doesn't have a mandate for this kind of thing at all. So again, if he were looking at his, looking at their blocking and tackling in a really shrewd way in November, or even before the election, they would have known that a huge border surge was kind of the last thing they needed for their first year in office.
Yeah, this just a quick thing. This is a big problem for the Biden White House. I mean, the U.S. immigration system is broken. And Congress isn't going to fix it because of polarization. And Democrats are now scaling back their plans on comprehensive immigration. They're focusing on the dreamers, but they're going to need 10 Republicans in all likelihood, unless they try to pass that along a partisan basis. But I don't see that being a top priority for them right now. It is a top priority, but they know it's going to be such a battle to actually get it done. And this is an issue that's not going to go away. Remember, President Obama at one point was called the deporter in chief by his own allies, the Democratic Party, because campaigning on immigration, kind of easy. Governing on immigration, very difficult. And this could really hurt. This could really hurt the Biden White House, because it's an ongoing story, and it's irritated the press, honestly. I mean, Biden has certainly had a honeymoon with the media, but the fact that they're not allowing the media to go to the border and they're restricting access, that's not going over well with us.
Yeah, no, and I would point out, to our audience, if you're not familiar, Joe Biden's popularity and his approval ratings have been fairly high, certainly much higher than Donald Trump's that never went over %. And on COVID, he's up like in the 60s, even 70, the economy. And so the COVID bill provided all this money that's going to be flowing to the states. I've talked to states recently that are, they're thrilled with their flush money that they're going to have. So I think, Bob, you raised a point about, if the tax increases don't go through, that may be hard to get through. That may benefit Biden too. But actually, another question I wanted to have for our international audience is, Joe Biden, President Biden, has very much sort of changed the tone in working with our international allies, and certainly, gotten back into WHO and other things. So how do you think, has that been well received? How does that play out as we're working on these policy fronts? And how might we, given sort of the success that we've had so far with COVID, how might that be helpful in our relations with in Europe? And also, the talk of the COVID passport now. I know within the United States, you have some Republicans who oppose it. But if I can get back to seeing my friends in Europe and get to places that I'd like to, I'm happy to, got a shot, be happy to bring my COVID passport with me. How is that politics going to play out in sort of the bigger backdrop, for both of you, question for both of you, our international prospects going forward?
I think, this is more of a traditional presidency after a very untraditional presidency. And I think there are positives of that and there are drawbacks of that. Part of the reason why Donald Trump was elected is because people were tired of the traditional presidency. And we saw lots of waves going back and forth over the last 2 decades of Republicans winning Congress and then Democrats winning Congress. And that all led to frustration with both parties and Trump being elected. So Biden is certainly, as you mentioned, he's entering pacts that Trump got us out of, and the Paris Accord as well. So the traditional allies are kind of back. I think he has enormous challenges on a few things. How to deal and punish Russia for their antagonistic behavior, and certainly what does he do with Iran? Iran is interested in and so is Biden in getting the nuclear deal back, but they want the sanctions waived. And the Biden administration doesn't want to look weak. And similarly, they don't want to look weak on China. So they have kept certain policies of Trump, including the tariffs on China. And that has become, you could argue even it was antagonistic and not a good relationship before, but Biden has sent a number of signals with allies that China has not liked. So now we're seeing a closer collaboration between China and Russia, because obviously it's complicated, but China is both key to our economy and also a competitor and a rival. And it is something that I think it's the Biden administration on foreign policy has been cautious and evaluated the situation, is still evaluating a lot of these situations. And I think that's smart. He's got to deal with what to do in Afghanistan. But certainly that, the traditional allies that Trump kind of pushed away and criticized publicly, they're back in the fold with the U.S. government now.
And AB?
Yeah, I think that, again, the goal for Biden, as we know from the campaign and from his whole professional career, one of his top priorities was foreign policy, national security, and as president to get back into these accords and these institutions and a more of a multilateral approach to our problems. He's obviously, Bob's right, he's aware that since he's been out of office, the sort of shared goals and cohesion between the Russians and the Chinese is a dangerous issue, and that is one that's going to require a new approach. What's interesting is if you look at what Biden's goal is, what he wants, he's being cautious because he wants to sort of make no news. He's hoping that through reestablished relationships with allies It will lead to fewer challenges and standoffs and confrontations. And for a domestic audience, just a feeling of calm, that he's not going to be having giant pageant-like meetings with Kim Jong-un that go nowhere. He's not an optics man, both internationally and domestically. What he's trying to do domestically is quiet. And again, it is calibrated and is calculated. He's hoping that if Republicans in Congress won't work with him, that he will win over Republican voters. And Barbara mentions his approval rating, which in the era of polarization is absolutely nuts, that his approval rating is near 60% overall, and his COVID approval is more than 70. That is, I keep waiting for it to go down. I believe it will go down, but that's money in his pocket, he thinks. And what he's doing, as Barbara mentioned, across the states, is doing strategic, television commercials and all this messaging to audiences that include Trump voters about how the package will benefit them. Making sure that mayors who like it, who are Republicans, get on CNN and say, I think it's great and it's going to be really helpful. And that he's hoping that keeping things calm and free of conflict on the international stage, not trying anything new, and again, on the domestic stage, not doing a gun control bill right now, he can engender at least an opening, not actually trust, but at least an opening with an electorate, voters beyond his own party. And he really firmly believes that. And so while Bob's right, he's not likely to work with Republicans because he figures it's their goal to just stick him in the eye for 2022. I will be watching with fascination what perspectives voters have as we enter the midterm campaign about tariffs, trade, troops in Afghanistan under Biden, and then also domestically, how much their trust in government has either gone up, stayed the same, been reduced after all this money and all this support went out into communities after they were devastated. So he's using the same strategy both on the world stage that he is domestically, which is to do a lot of this behind closed doors, make no news, make no splash, but shore up the foundations quietly. And he thinks that it's going to lead to more success down the road. Again, I'm not betting on his success, but I also know they've made the calculation that they are willing to go for broke. If they lose in 2022, their attitude is they'll be glad that they got back in all these international organizations, got America back to the table, and that they spent all this money trying to help the economy and to help hurting Americans. So it's an interesting new way of looking at success. They literally think they'll lose if they don't go for broke, but they do it in a calm, quiet way without making headlines. It's not something we've seen in my lifetime.
Well, and I think as you mentioned with that 60% approval rating, I think it's as a Republican, I think that's something Republicans aren't maybe paying close enough attention to, that shows that there is sort of interest and for some bipartisan work to be done, even though the bases might make that impossible. But Patrick, I wanted to, if you have some other questions from the audience, I saw some that popped up, but I'm not able to get to them if you wanted to.
Absolutely. Happy to. Two questions kind of in the same vein for our panelists, both focusing on voter rights and electoral systems. First, allow me to read verbatim. The 2020 elections made clear yet again, the higher the voter turnout, the less likely it is for Republicans to win an election. If everyone votes in the USA, the Republicans can hardly win. That's why they now want to change the rules in their favor. With a wave of new laws, Republicans almost all over the country are trying to change the electoral system in their favor. The Brennan Center, a New York think tank, has counted 253 laws in 43 states that aim to make the voting stricter. Do you see political representation at risk? And then the second question, in a similar vein, more specifically, what do you think about the Georgia voting law? Is this an attempt to hold on to power?
as far as voting rights, that is key to what Democrats want to do. They know they have it's the first bill. It's called HR1 and S1, so that means it's their top priority. But they know they can't get any Republican votes for it. We used to just cover federal politics and not state politics, but now we cover a lot of state politics because it's all intermeshed. And states around, I mean, Georgia's doing that, but that's just the beginning. Different states, red and blue, are passing voting measures. I do think there is some key. Republicans were upset that they lost, that President Trump lost Georgia, and also then they lost the Senate by losing 2 seats. I mean, they had not won a statewide race in many years, and they lost 2. Granted, on the same day, most people were voting the same way. So there is certainly some, okay, we're going to change the rules now. And we've seen that in congressional redistricting, where it's usually done along a partisan basis, and that's going to be continuing. So these state houses around the country, whether it's red or blue, they're going to be passing and are passing a number of voting measures. And the big question, of course, for Democrats is, okay, are they going to get rid of the legislative filibuster for certain issues? Maybe they don't get rid of it entirely, but voting rights is one that's been mentioned that it should be done for. That's what certainly a lot of Democrats say. Senator Warnock, who just won from Georgia, basically, and put it a lot more, he put it in a lot more succinct way than I'm going to say it. But basically, he said, why are we worried about the minority party in the Senate when we're not worried? If we do that and we worry about protecting their rights, we're not protecting the rights of minority voters in this country, because they are disenfranchised, and we need to pass this bill. So overall, I think that goes to the core of what Democrats want to do. You still have to get Joe Biden on board. He seemed to shift on the legislative filibuster at his first press conference, and you still have to get 50 votes in the Senate, which is going to be difficult. That would be seen certainly by Republicans as a power grab, and Republicans have said they promised to grind the Senate to a halt if the filibuster really is changed in any way. So again, another sign that we're headed again for stormy partisan waters, and it is something that both parties are very upset with gridlock. And it used to be that even in the 1990s, where President Clinton and the Speaker then, Newt Gingrich, even amid and after impeachment, they could still strike deals. Those days are over. It's a different era. So I do think that you're going to see what's happening in Georgia happen in a lot more states, and there's going to be a lot of coverage over that over the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's fascinating because Georgia just happens. Bob's right and Brennan Center's right. This is happening all over the country, almost every state, because Republicans and Democrats have acknowledged that if Democrats get what they want on voting rights, Republicans will be out of power nearly permanently. And Democrats think that if Republicans get what they want on voting restrictions, that the Democrats will be out of power for the near future. The Senate, the structure protects Republicans. The Electoral College protects Republicans. The way that it doesn't matter that Joe Biden won 7 million votes in California and New York. They don't matter. What matters is was in 2016, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and then in 2020, Georgia and Arizona and Wisconsin. And so the fight for structural advantage is as Bob said, is the most intense thing, and it's existential. Both parties believe. I don't know where the president's going to go on this process question, but Georgia is the center of the political universe because it just switched to purple and then blue with the help of Donald Trump. He lost the Senate Republicans their majority. He killed off the prospects of those 2 Republican incumbent senators being reelected. He elected 2 Democrats, but Biden did squeak by with a bunch of Republicans who voted for Joe Biden and not President Trump. And then they thought they could vote for Senator Perdue and Kelly Loeffler and keep a balanced, divided government. You have Stacey Abrams, who is this singular political figure who has been at voter registration and voter education for with great intensity for 10 years, but most specifically since 2018, when she lost the gubernatorial race by 55,000 votes. In Georgia, they're probably confident that they can overcome whatever was passed into law last week with enough energy, with enough education and registration, because they have a larger share of African-American voters in their electorate than other places. But in these other places, it's going to cause a real problem from Democrats who, during the era of Obama and Biden, in those 8 years, lost a massive amount of state house elections, state Senate elections, and then federal elections in the Congress, and lost at redistricting. So they're already at a disadvantage that they're very aware of. It's again, I have literally no idea the administration is going to handle this. And as you can see, they've intentionally made no news on this. They're doing something to keep it tamped down. But it's a roiling issue for both parties, and Republicans are very blunt about it. And President Trump was very blunt about it too. If enough people can vote by absentee ballot, and for weeks and weeks and weeks of early voting, Republicans will lose.
Well, I end up disagreeing with both Democrats and Republicans on this, because the reality is, even though Trump lost down ballot, aside from those two Senate races, which actually was another Trump loss, in Georgia, for example, kept the state house. In Arizona, that Trump lost, Republicans kept the state house. In Pennsylvania, that Trump lost, Republicans kept the state house. So Republicans down ballot did well. Republicans in the House gained seats, didn't lose them. You had people like, out in California, two Korean American women, Republicans, who won, running well ahead of Trump, and you had other people around the country who did the same. So I think it's foolish for Republicans to hang on to this sort of dead political Trump corpse, and also overreact to their control of how you vote is going to make a difference. But I think people still vote on kitchen table issues and what are you going to do. And I think the example of that is that, even though Trump lost, Republican ideas did win down ballot in many places that he lost. We certainly, and then in Virginia, I could tell you, we've had voter ID here in Virginia, I guess for about a decade, and Democrats took control of our House, our state House, our state Senate, and got more congressional seats by organizing, getting people registered, and getting them out there and running against Donald Trump. So message always trumps a lot of these things. And I am for more absentee voting. I think Republicans are foolish to be afraid of that, because Republicans are a lot of professionals, a lot of business people. They're busy. They're moms and dads who like to have if I were in the Virginia State Legislature right now, I'd introduce a bill for Sunday voting. That's a great time for people to be able to vote, go to church and then go vote. So I think both sides get it a little wrong. And I maybe highlight to people to read some of what Gabe Sterling of Georgia has been saying, because he opposed Donald Trump's attempt to steal the election in Georgia. He's also pointing out that a lot of the things that are being attacked in Georgia right now are factually wrong too. And I think it's an example of how polarized things are, that nobody wants to kind of look at the bill because they just want to go to their corners on you're either Trump or you're Stacey Abrams. And there's a lot of territory in between Trump and Stacey Abrams, because I'm not, and I think a lot of people in Georgia and elsewhere fall in the middle. So that's part of the
one thing, Barbara, I want to mention, and I think those are good points. And also, when you're talking about the election in November of 2022, about the battle of Congress and the House and Senate, as you mentioned, Biden's numbers for dealing with COVID are high. That may change. We'll see. But I think the bill that just passed, there's a lot of PR campaign going on. I think it's going to be very difficult to demonize that bill, because there have been several COVID bills. But what you said earlier, I think, was a fascinating point about the vaccines. And so my first point is that voters have very short memories. So if the coronavirus is doing, we're kind of getting back to normal. We're back in our offices, and life is not exactly 100% normal, but it's a lot more normal. Well, okay, then it's still a year basically to the election. And I think it's very dangerous for Republicans, and you're seeing a growing number of them say, I am against having proof of vaccine. Because as you mentioned, I think a lot of people, and I haven't looked at polling, but I'm going to, are willing to say, yeah, as long as everyone, I'll go to that party, as long as everyone at the party has gotten the vaccine. And if some people haven't got the vaccine, they shouldn't be allowed in. And that would remind voters going forward of COVID, because Republicans, I think, want to talk about policy and raising taxes and massive spending in the fall of 2022. I think it'd be very dangerous if they're trying to defend, you shouldn't have to have proof of your vaccine. I just think that's going to be really unpopular.
Well, and I would think also, other countries can require it. Other countries require certain shots when you go to countries
yep.
that may not normally take. So regardless of what we do here in the US, we have international businesses, we have people who like to travel, and certainly once we can travel again, there's certainly a big bug, I think, to do that. So I think Republicans might want to be a little more thoughtful on how they approach that. But Patrick, if we have other questions from the audience, maybe we can take one more, I think, or you tell me how much time we have, if we have time for one more from the audience.
Sure. I want to be mindful of the deadline, but one more. If our panelists could perhaps touch on the relationship to Europe. If there's one thing that there is agreement on in Congress, what would Europe and Germany need to do to improve the transatlantic relationship? What does Germany have to do to improve the relationship, which is definitely under strain?
I don't know that there's one policy area or objective that that needs focus, but I want to make mention before we leave here today that in addition to a new perspective about our alliances coming from the Biden team, there are still people in the Congress who are working with Democrats and who are Republicans who don't view the global stage and our relationships in the ways that President Trump did. And so I want to read off, there are still Republicans in the Congress that work with Democrats. There's a problem solvers caucus in the House. It's 54 members, I believe, 27 of each party. And then in the Senate, there are a lot of people at the table together, again, doing the quiet work, hoping that they can maybe pass smaller initiatives. And they're important to be in contact with in terms of our international relationships, our economic shared economic goals, our trade relationships, and any kind of challenges that come along. And I want, before we close, to give them their due. On the Republican side, Senators Collins, Romney, Cassidy, Toomey, Cornyn, Young, Rounds, Murkowski, Portman, Ernst, Graham, Grassley, and Rubio. They're at the table with Senator Manchin and a lot of the Democratic members, again, quietly, but they are the people that see things differently in a lot of ways than President Trump, and really are sort of the governing Republicans who believe that we still have an essential role on the world stage and across the globe. And so they're critical, I believe, to meeting the challenges that we share, to bettering our relations, and to actually domestically to continuing to keep the lights on in our government in terms of fostering some consensus in the moments when we need it. Maybe not on big partisan bills, but certainly every year when we get to spending bills and everything else. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned them because I know that they work in good faith with Democrats, and they're essential. And I think that people should know who they are so that they can foster relationships with them.
And just the last point I'll make, because I know we're up against it, but a lot has changed, obviously, with the changing administration. One thing that is not going back to normal or what it was before is trade. Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump have changed trade policy. There are a lot of people are skeptical of trade in the United States. The TPP was the last trade bill that Obama pushed. It didn't succeed. Biden has said he would try to revive it, but they're going to have to restructure it. So there's a lot of skepticism with trade, and that's going to continue going forward no matter who's president.